Ada, and this is Amo True Crime Stories. The cases discussed on this channel are based on publicly available information, including news reports, court records, police documents, and other verified sources available at the time this video was created. This content is presented for documentary, educational, and commentary purposes only. Any opinions expressed are personal interpretations and should not be considered definitive statements of a fact. All individuals mentioned are presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. Some material discussed may be disturbing to certain viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. With that being said, let's get into this case. In part 1, we followed the disappearance of Shannan Gilbert on a dark spring morning in 2010. What began as the search for one missing woman led investigators to a horrifying discovery along Ocean Parkway. One body became four became many more. And over the years, a mystery that had haunted Long Island grew into one of the largest serial killer investigations in American history. For decades, the killer remained unidentified. Then investigators reopened the case, they followed the evidence, they followed the phones, and eventually, they followed it all to one man, a man who had spent years living what appeared to be an ordinary suburban life. In part 2, we're going to examine how investigators built their case, how they finally identified their suspect, and how one of the most notorious serial killer investigations in modern history came to an end. Let's get into it. As investigators struggled to solve the Gilgo Beach murders, controversy was brewing inside the very department responsible for finding the killer. At the center of the controversy was Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke. Years later, Burke would be convicted in an unrelated federal corruption case involving the assault of a handcuffed suspect and efforts to cover up what happened. Critics of the Gilgo Beach investigation have long questioned whether corruption and internal politics slowed the hunt for the killer. Those questions only intensified after it became public that Burke had resisted FBI involvement in the case. The FBI had resources, behavioral analysts, advanced investigative tools, and experience tracking serial offenders. Yet the relationship between Suffolk County police leadership and federal investigators became strained. As years passed without an arrest, families of the victims began asking a painful question. Could more have been done? The controversy surrounding Burke extended beyond the Gilgo investigation itself. Years before becoming police chief, internal investigators reportedly concluded that Burke allegedly had maintained a relationship with a woman involved in prostitution and drug dealing, and had engaged in sexual activity while on duty in police vehicles. Those allegations raised concerns among some officers about his judgment and conduct. Whether any of this directly affected the Gilgo Beach investigation remains a matter of debate, but what is not debated is the timeline. For more than a decade, the case stalled. Then, after new leadership took over and a new task force reopened the investigation in 2022, investigators identified a suspect within months. For many observers, that raised an uncomfortable question. What might have happened if that level of focus had existed years earlier?
Former Suffolk County Police Chief is accused of botching the initial investigation, and his latest arrest only intensifies the accusations that he did botch that initial Gilgo Beach investigation, that he famously blocked the FBI. Many point to his own behavior as the reason Burke did not want the FBI poking around in his county. Burke rose to power despite a department investigation early in his career involving allegations of drugs, a lost gun, and a sex worker in his squad car. In 2015, he was arrested by the FBI and convicted of beating a suspect who stole pornography and sex toys from his department SUV. That arrest also led to the downfall of the Suffolk County District Attorney. While in federal custody, Burke was investigated after oxycodone was found in his housing area. Now, the one-time four-star chief arrested Tuesday morning for allegedly soliciting sex with a male undercover officer in a Suffolk park by the Vietnam War Memorial. He's being charged with offering a sex act, public lewdness, indecent exposure, and criminal solicitation. And they say he tried to get out of the arrest by leveraging his status as former law enforcement.
He identified himself and said who he was. Do you know who I am?
He was expressing to us how this would, be a public humiliation for him and such.
Attorney John Ray, who represents the families of Gilgo Beach victims Jessica Taylor and Shannan Gilbert, had this to say on Burke's arrest. The arrest confirmed everything I said about this pervert. He was in charge of the entire investigation of Oak Beach and Gilgo Beach, and that says it all. He definitely played a direct role in suppressing the investigation.
The investigators caught a break. A witness had reported seeing a pickup truck near one of the crime scenes. Using vehicle registration databases, detectives traced that truck to a man living in Massapequa Park. His name, Rex Heuermann. He drove a dark green first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, and that detail immediately caught investigators' attention. Years earlier, a friend of Amber Lynn Costello had told police he believed the man who picked her up the night she vanished was driving a Chevrolet Avalanche. Now detectives had a suspect who owned that exact vehicle. At that point, the task force shifted into a new phase of the investigation. Slow, careful, methodical. They couldn't risk alerting him. Not now, not when they might finally be getting close. So investigators began quietly building their case. They pulled billing records connected to burner phones believed to have been used to arrange meetings with several victims. They retested DNA evidence recovered from the crime scenes, and they dug deep into Heuermann's digital footprint. What they found was disturbing. According to investigators, his internet activity revealed an interest in violent torture pornography. But that wasn't all. He was also obsessively following the Gilgo Beach investigation, reading articles, searching for updates, looking up evidence, even searching his own name. It was as if he was watching the investigation unfold in real time, trying to determine how close detectives were getting. Then investigators uncovered another critical piece of evidence. Cell phone records placed Heuermann in contact with some of the victims shortly before they disappeared. The circle around him was getting tighter. And then came the DNA. Detectives needed a direct sample from Heuermann, something they could compare to the male hairs recovered from the burlap used to bind several victims. But they couldn't simply knock on his door and ask for it, so they waited and they watched. A surveillance team followed him during his daily routine in Manhattan, where he worked as an architect. Then one afternoon, their patience paid off. Investigators watched as Heuermann finished lunch and tossed the remains into a public trash can. Inside was a discarded pizza box, partially eaten pizza crust still inside. The moment he walked away, detectives moved in. They recovered the box, sent it to the crime lab, and waited. When the results came back, they were exactly what investigators had hoped for. The DNA obtained from the pizza crust matched genetic material connected to a male hair recovered from the burlap used to restrain one of the victims. A pizza crust, after years of secrecy, years of planning, and years of evading detection, one of the most significant breakthroughs in the case came from something most people throw away without a second thought: a discarded pizza crust left behind in a Manhattan trash can.
When Rex Heuermann became a suspect, all of his cell phone records were subpoenaed.
It turns out Rex Heuermann allegedly used multiple burner phones to contact victims, to contact sex workers. That's how he did his business.
Then police learned that burner phones that he had paid minutes for were in close proximity to his personal cell phone and to the victim's cell phones, either in Massapequa or in Midtown Manhattan, where he worked. So then they had a connection.
They're pretty sure they have their man, but they need something that directly ties Rex to the victims. They need DNA.
When police were doing the investigation in 2011, there was a male hair that was found on the camouflage burlap on Megan Waterman.
With DNA evidence, especially with biological fluids, liquids, whatever it might be, blood, body, other body fluids, you have a chance of degrading it so much that you can't do anything with it. But things like hair follicles and all those other things, they kind of last forever.
So investigators really needed to find out if this hair was connected to him. In July of 2022, investigators set up outside of his home. Undercover detectives start going through his garbage. You know, they're looking for any kind of a bottle, anything that they can test to see if they can find his DNA. But nothing turns up. After 5 months of surveilling him, they decide they're going to focus on him at work and see what they can find. A surveillance team was set up outside of Rex Heuermann's office in Midtown Manhattan, and that is where they started to observe him.
What the task force decides to do is have undercover officers pose as sanitation persons, just hoping they'd find a way to get DNA from something that he used or something he threw away.
They watched him throw away a pizza box in a New York City trash bin.
The investigators immediately grabbed the pizza box. Inside the box, they found an uneaten pizza crust.
They take it out and they take a swab. And then they send it to the Suffolk County Crime Lab to test it for DNA. And it turns out the DNA that was found on the pizza crust matches the DNA from the root of the hair found on Megan Waterman.
That moment was kind of the final linchpin in the case. They knew that they had a case. They knew they could tie Rex Heuermann to the Gilgo Beach murders.
So they finally have the DNA evidence to make an arrest on Rex Heuermann. If this is their guy, they want to get him off the street before he may do any more harm.
Anytime you have somebody identified and that person's still at large, it's always a concern, because if you do it once, you would go out there and do it again.
But now they're in a really tough spot because they have to make sure they have a strong enough case so he can't get out. So they looked at what he was doing on the internet. Rex Heuermann's search history is beyond disturbing. Sadistic measures that involved children, that involved sex workers.
When we look at crime scene behaviors and we see the wrapping and maybe ligatures that we find, this is consistent with somebody who would be looking at violent pornography, at domination and control, and deviant pornography.
They also found searches that were looking up the very investigation into what turned out to be him as the main suspect. He really seemed to want to know where investigators were at. His searches include very specific words. A list of each and every victim that was a part of the Gilgo 4.
Rex Heuermann had searched for information about the Gilgo Beach murders more than 200 times.
The thing that sort of jumps out at you was he was also searching for the victims' family members, their sisters, and in one instance, their child. So that was concerning.
I mean, it's just mind-blowing. This idea that oftentimes offenders are online with you. You can be rubbing shoulders with someone in a community who could actually be the killer.
Once they had this evidence gathered, they made their move.
It was a Thursday night. Unbeknownst to any reporter in town, a team of police officers walked up behind Rex Heuermann as he left his office in Midtown Manhattan. They surrounded him. And they quietly told him, "You're under arrest." And he didn't resist. He seemed a little surprised, but he didn't resist.
Major developments in a decades-old serial killer case. There has been an arrest of a suspect linked to the Gilgo Beach murders from Long Island, New York. Police have not released the identity of the person they have in custody. We do know that he's in his 50s or 60s.
It felt like the world stopped. Anybody who's been following this case stopped what they were doing. What do you mean there's been an arrest? Who could it be? What's the name? How old is this person? Where does this person live? All these questions are flooding your mind. And it turns out this architect, Rex Heuermann, he is in custody, arrested for 3 of the Gilgo 4 victims. Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartholomew, and Amber Costello.
Rex, did you do it?
We got a glimpse of him on the news. You just thought, wow, there's the suspect. That's who they've been looking for. The very fact that nobody knew that investigators were zeroing in on Rex Heuermann is really, truly remarkable, considering all this investigation has been through over the many years.
The internet essentially goes insane. And a big part of that is because there was no information for so long. I mean, it was something that was unfathomable for so many people.
I just thought it was a joke. I thought it was like some kind of meme or something. I don't even know, like for a second. It's just like you absolutely cannot see that that is a real thing in front of you because it's so shocking.
When the arrest was announced and I saw Rex Heuermann, I just sort of noticed the deadness in his eyes. He didn't seem that bothered. I noticed he didn't say anything. I was there when the indictment was unsealed and it was packed. There were a number of victims' family members there. Megan Waterman's daughter was there. Melissa Bartholomew's sister that got the alleged taunting calls was there. It was very electric. It was moving.
I would first and foremost like to offer my deepest condolences to the family members.
Just going back to the very beginning of when these women went missing and the very idea that maybe nobody would miss them, we've learned through the years and through the interviews that the victims' families have given is that they were very much loved. They were very much missed. And these families, they were desperate to find answers.
I can only imagine what you had to endure over the last decade.
So after all these years of searching, it's very possible there's finally an answer for these victims' family members. Perhaps we finally can put a name and a face to the monster that we have been thinking about for all these years.
When I first heard the case against him, this high-tech, very careful, lengthy investigation that involved DNA and surveillance and cell phone data, I was sort of struck by, there it is, right? There's police work. And that's sort of what was missing from so many years of this case, was just police doing their jobs.
The state police and the Suffolk County Police descended on Rex Heuermann's house the morning after he was arrested. They were looking for evidence of more victims, evidence of trophies of the victims we knew about.
This is a search that lasted 12 days. Hundreds of search warrants were issued for this home. And we saw, the cameras were outside down the block watching investigators go in and out. There was a command post set up outside of their home.
I was told early on by law enforcement that Rex Heuermann was something of a hoarder. There was a lot of clutter in the house. There was a lot to go through. Inside the house was this concrete-lined steel vault that was in the basement, where he kept more than 280 guns. The investigators not only went to his house, there were at least 2 storage units that they searched. We were told by the police commissioner that the search was very fruitful, but the authorities did not want to get specific.
This comes as the investigation into the accused killer grows even wider across the country. Police in Atlantic City are now taking a new look at the cold case files of 4 sex workers killed in 2006.
Almost as soon as Rex Heuermann was arrested, law enforcement started looking at properties that he was connected to. Rex Heuermann had property in South Carolina, and that's where law enforcement found a green Chevy Avalanche, and that was seized by the New York State Police. Law enforcement started looking at missing people or murders that he could be attached to.
A woman in South Carolina says a friend of hers who went missing 6 years ago was last seen with a man who fits the description of Rex Heuermann.
There is still a slim chance that she could be alive.
And there are other investigations going on in places like Las Vegas, where he has property.
The cold case investigators there said they were checking to see if there were any victims whose circumstances were similar to the Gilgo Beach victims.
So far, law enforcement in all these jurisdictions haven't announced any connections between Rex Heuermann and their cases. But when you put it all together, where is that going to lead this investigation? Rex Heuermann's family maintains that they had no idea what was going on. And a lot of people say that's hard to believe, but it's actually a story that we've heard before.
Heuermann's wife was extremely upset. Once the investigators had finished their 12 days of searching, she told her lawyers that the house had virtually been destroyed, and they released photos of the house.
And his wife, Asa Ellerup, files for divorce. There have been reports that she has been suffering through breast cancer. I mean, talk about having the literal rug ripped out from underneath you. So you've got that happening at your house. You've got the man who is providing the financial stability in your house and the insurance. Everything you know is now over.
Asa Ellerup, she's been struggling financially, and things have been rough for her and her 2 adult kids. But tonight we can report exclusively that Ellerup and the couple's 2 children signed a production deal for a documentary about their ordeal. They're being paid at least $1 million for this. Their lawyers are getting about $600,000.
A lot of people were taken aback because you don't really hear about a deal like this all that often. And it's kind of been this thorny issue for many people because the victims' families are struggling. But the attorney for Rex Heuermann's family says they're struggling too.
Speaking of my clients and my clients only, their existence now is as bleak and as hard scrabble as you can imagine. In fact, one of the things that they're trying to get back, and they filed their notice of claim, are vintage jackets and clothes that they need for the winter. This is no joke. Their road ahead is arduous, it is long, and no matter what happens with this case, no matter if he's acquitted, convicted on all counts, or something in between, their lives will never be the same.
Beyond Rex's family, many people, and rightly so, believe that the focus should be on the victims and their families.
I really had no picture in my mind of what the Long Island serial killer would look like. And when I saw Rex Heuermann, if he indeed is the killer, he was so big compared to them. A lot of the victims were so petite. As Amber Costello's aunt said, these girls never had a chance.
I've cried because, I've been thinking I think about her all the time. And for, the other family members and these girls being sex workers, they're all way more than that.
If these women were college students or nurses or police officers or teachers, this may have had a different outcome in the way it was covered and the type of attention it may have had. And in many cases, these women were just trying to make a better life for their own families. And that is one of the real tragedies, because had these cases been front and center, like we've seen with other missing person cases, who knows where we would be today?
It was July 13th, 2023, evening rush hour, Midtown Manhattan. For decades, Rex Heuermann had walked these same streets. At 6'4", he wasn't the kind of man who disappeared into a crowd. Yet on that afternoon, he appeared to be doing exactly what he'd done thousands of times before. Leaving work, heading home, just another commuter making his way back to Long Island. At least, that's what it looked like. Surveillance footage captured the moment everything changed. As Heuermann walked through Midtown, several law enforcement officials moved in. Within seconds, he was surrounded. And just like that, it was over. Years of investigation had led to this moment. That evening, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison addressed the public. He described Heuermann as a demon that walks among us, a predator who had shattered lives and devastated families. But for investigators, the arrest was only the beginning. Now they needed to find out what had been hiding behind the front door of the house Heuermann called home. Over the next 12 days, investigators conducted an extensive search of the property. What they claimed to have found was chilling. Among the evidence was a document the prosecutors later described as a blueprint, a planning document, one that allegedly detailed how crimes could be carried out while minimizing risk. The document contained columns labeled problems, supplies, DS, and TRG. According to prosecutors, this wasn't random. It was organized, methodical, structured, almost like a project plan, the way an architect might organize a complex job. Investigators also recovered computer files, they say, contained detailed checklists related to committing crimes, avoiding detection, and disposing of evidence. They also seized hundreds of firearms from the property. But then, the investigation took another disturbing turn. Attorney John Ray, who represents the family of victim Valerie Mack, later stated that investigators had informed him they believe some victims may have been tortured and killed inside the house itself. Authorities have not publicly proven those allegations in court, but the claims sent shockwaves through the case. Because this wasn't an abandoned warehouse, it wasn't a remote cabin hidden deep in the woods. It was a house in a suburban neighborhood, a house where families lived nearby, a house where children rode bicycles, a house where neighbors passed by every day. The home itself was approximately 1,343 square feet. It had originally belonged to Heuermann's parents. He grew up there. Years later, he purchased it from his mother. And according to people who knew the neighborhood, the house barely changed. Time seemed frozen there. The same appearance, the same layout, the same structure he had known as a child. To some neighbors, it stood out. Not because of what anyone knew, but because of what nobody knew. Behind that front door lived a wife, 2 children, a family, a mortgage, a normal suburban life. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. Because while neighbors exchanged greetings from a distance, investigators now believe a far darker story may have been unfolding inside. His defense attorney told a very different story. According to him, at the moment of his arrest, Rex Heuermann was in tears. The attorney later said his client spoke only a few words. "I didn't do this." For years, that remained his position. His wife, Asa Ellerup, who had been married to him for 27 years, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest, kept the house and is living in it as of today. Yet she continued attending court hearings, standing quietly in the courtroom, watching, listening, waiting. Her attorney repeatedly made the same distinction, not that Heuermann was innocent, but that the man she believed she knew was not someone she thought capable of crimes like these. Then the case entered a long and difficult chapter. Court appearance after court appearance, month after month, year after year, for 2 years and 9 months. Rex Heuermann stood before judges and entered the same plea: not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, every single time. Then came April 8, 2026, Suffolk County Court, Riverhead, New York. The courtroom was packed. His ex-wife was there. His daughter was there. Reporters filled every available seat. And seated throughout the gallery were family members who had spent decades waiting for answers. Some of them more than 30 years. Heuermann appeared calm, matter of fact, almost emotionless. Throughout the hearing, he stared straight ahead. He never turned around, never looked back at the crowded courtroom behind him. Then the judge began the formal process. One question at a time, one answer at a time. Reporters later described Heuermann's voice as loud, clear, confident, with a smirk on his face. Then came the moment no one in that courtroom would ever forget, one charge at a time. He entered his plea, guilty, 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 again and again and again. 7 times, 7 murders, 7 guilty pleas. In court, Heuermann admitted to killing 7 women. He admitted to strangling and torturing them. He admitted to using burner phones to contact them and their families after he killed their loved one to torture them emotionally. He admitted to wrapping their bodies in burlap and dismembering some of them. And he admitted to leaving them along Gilgo Beach and other locations across Long Island. But then something unexpected happened without being prompted, and despite not having been formally charged in the case, he admitted to another killing. Karen Vergata, 8 victims, 8 admissions after years of denial. The man who had repeatedly stood in court and said not guilty had finally confessed. According to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, Heuermann is expected to receive multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. His sentencing is scheduled for June 17, 2026. Barring any unforeseen developments, he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. After the hearing, his defense attorney spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. He described the guilty plea as cathartic. But Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney saw it differently. Standing before families who had waited decades for justice, he delivered a message that captured the significance of the moment. He said Heuermann had spent years pretending to be an ordinary suburban father, a normal neighbor, a normal citizen, when, according to prosecutors, he was secretly hunting vulnerable women. Tierney said Heuermann believed he could silence his victims forever, that he could erase them and get away with murder, but he was wrong. Because in the end, it was the victims who had the final word. The victims who refused to be forgotten. The victims who refused to stay silent. And after decades of waiting, their voices were finally heard. After Rex Heuermann's guilty plea, public attention shifted to a different question. What was it like for the family that lived inside the house? A later documentary series, The Gilgo Beach Killer, House of Secrets, focused on Heuermann's ex-wife, Asa Ellerup, and their daughter, as they struggled to come to terms with what he had admitted. According to Asa, Heuermann confessed to her that several of the murders took place inside their Massapequa Park home while she and the children were away. He allegedly told her that most of the victims were killed in a basement room that had once been his childhood bedroom, which was kept locked, and no one was allowed to go in. What shocked many viewers even more was Asa's decision after hearing that confession. In the documentary, she revealed that she had moved into the renovated basement and was sleeping in the very room where Heuermann allegedly told her some of the crimes had occurred. Asa explained that the room had been completely gutted and rebuilt. She said her decision was partly spiritual and partly personal. She described feeling haunted by what happened and said she wanted, in her own way, to acknowledge the suffering of the victims. The documentary presents a family trying to understand how a man they lived with for decades could secretly be responsible for some of the most notorious murders in Long Island history. For many viewers, the most disturbing part wasn't the confession itself. It was the realization that, according to prosecutors, these crimes may have happened inside an ordinary suburban home while neighbors walked by, children played outside, and life appeared completely normal on the surface. But if you ask me, sleeping in the very room where some of the victims were killed is pretty sick to me, in my opinion, of course.
Asa Ellerup is still processing the revelation that she was married to a serial killer for 3 decades. Weeks before ex-husband Rex Heuermann confessed to brutally murdering 8 women during an April 8th court appearance, the man known as the Gilgo Beach killer privately met with Ellerup and admitted to his crimes. Ellerup shared that she's still trying to understand the 2 sides of the family man she knew, explaining on Peacock's documentary, The Gilgo Beach Killer House of Secrets, during its 4th episode, released April 23rd, that she began sleeping in what was once the vaulted kill room of their Long Island home, where Heuermann brought 7 of his victims, 3 of whom he dismembered.
The brutal truth is that Rex Heuermann said he dismembered the bodies in this room. Now, there's me. I'm in this room. And I'm here because I do feel spiritual. I am trying to say spiritually in my own way that I am really sorry for what these victims went through.
She remodeled the space, which originally served as Heuermann's childhood bedroom, into a functional basement, decorated with a green Hello Kitty bedspread and shelvings of plushies and stuffed animals. The walls are adorned with floral paintings and a cross. Ellerup legally filed for divorce from Heuermann after his 2023 arrest in order to keep their Long Island house. While she initially believed in his innocence, he pled guilty to murdering 7 women and confessed to killing an 8th during the April 8th court appearance in New York. Of her former spouse's double life, she said on the documentary, "I want to get to know this other side of Rex. I want to know why Rex killed these women, what his triggers were." She added, "I'm processing the information in a very different way because now I see the evil in him."
Before we go any further, we need to stop. We need to actually meet him, because the most important thing you need to understand about this case, what this monster was counting on, was that he chose these women specifically because he believed the world would not slow down long enough to grieve them properly. He was wrong. But for too many years, he was right. Sandra Costilla was 28 years old. Sandra was a New Yorker by way of Trinidad and Tobago. She was an immigrant who had built a life in one of the most demanding cities on earth. She disappeared in November 1993, the same month grunge was on the radio, the same month millions of people were going about their ordinary lives. 2 hunters found her remains in a wooded area in the hamlet of North Sea, Southampton. For 30 years, her case was disconnected from everything. No task force, no documentary, no national headlines with her face on them. She was the first, and for 3 decades, almost nobody knew. Karen Vergara was 34 years old. Karen lived in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan. Her family last heard from her on Valentine's Day, 1996. Valentine's Day? Someone was waiting for her that night. Someone expected her to call. She never did. She was survived by 2 sons. Those boys grew up without answers. They grew up not even knowing for years that their mother had been found, because for so long she was known only as Jane Doe number 7. A number, not a name, not a mother, a number. It wasn't until October 2022, 26 years after she disappeared, that Karen Vergata was finally identified. Valerie Mack was 24 years old. Valerie was a Philadelphia mother who worked as an escort. She had a son. She disappeared in the spring or summer of 2000, last seen by family in Port Republic, New Jersey. A hunter's dog discovered her remains in a wooded area of Manorville in November 2000. She had been decapitated. Both of her hands had been severed. One of her legs had been cut off. He did that deliberately. He wanted to make her unidentifiable. He wanted to make sure that even in death, she could not be named, could not be found, could not be claimed by the people who loved her. It almost worked. She spent 20 years as Jane Doe number 6. Police publicly identified her remains in May 2020 using genetic genealogy technology that didn't exist when she died. Her son filed a wrongful death lawsuit on the eve of the guilty plea. He's been waiting his entire life to say his mother's name in a courtroom. Jessica Taylor was 20 years old. She was last seen at the Port Authority bus terminal in Manhattan on July 21st, 2003. She was barely out of her teenage years, living in the city, trying to make her way. Her mother, Elizabeth Basquiel, waited 23 years. When reporters found her outside the courthouse on April 8th, 2026, she said, "I'm glad that this is over. It took a big chunk of stress off my family and me." That sentence, said quietly by a mother who had been carrying this for more than 2 decades, is one of the most devastating things in this entire case. Not rage, not relief, just the unbearable weight finally, partially lifting a big chunk of stress. That's what it sounds like when a mother runs out of words. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was 25 years old. Maureen was from Norwich, Connecticut. She had a child. Not long before she disappeared, she had been threatened with eviction by her landlord. She was afraid of losing custody of her child, a fear that was consuming her. She traveled to New York City on July 9th, 2007, hoping to make $3,000 in a single day so she could keep her family together. That is not the story of a reckless person. That is the story of a mother who was desperate and scared, doing whatever she thought she had to do to keep her life from falling apart. At some point that night, she called her sister from Penn Station asking for a ride home to Connecticut. When it couldn't be arranged, she decided to take the train back alone. She never made it home. Her sister, Melissa Kahn, stood outside the courthouse and said, "Today is not about the person responsible. Today is about the lives of the women who were stolen, about their voices, their future, their families. They are the reason we are here." And then she said her sister's name with justice beside it for the first time. Maureen was never forgotten. Justice has finally found its way to you. I can't imagine this woman's guilt for losing her sister. Melissa Barthelemy was 24 years old. Melissa was originally from Buffalo, New York. She had gone to cosmetology school. Her sister remembers that she left town looking for work, looking for a fresh start. She wanted to get a job at a nice salon, her sister said. A nice salon. That's the dream. That's what she was working toward. She was living in a basement apartment in the Bronx when she disappeared on July 12th, 2009. That night, she told a friend she was going to meet a man on Long Island, and she'd be back in the morning. She was 4 feet 10, 95 pounds. She had no idea what was waiting for her. After she vanished, her killer used her phone to call her family. He called her 15-year-old sister, Amanda. On August 26, 2009, the man on the phone asked Amanda, "Do you think you'll ever see her again?" Then he answered his own question. "You won't. I killed her." He said it to a 15-year-old girl. Amanda Funderburg carried that phone call for 16 years. She was outside the courthouse waiting for a guilty plea that she had deserved since she was a teenager. Megan Waterman was 22 years old. Megan was from Scarborough, Maine. She had a 3-year-old daughter. Her name was Liliana. On June 5th, 2010, Megan told her boyfriend she was going out and would call him later. The next day, she was contacted by a burner phone that had just been activated that same morning, bought specifically to reach her. She left her motel room to meet the man on the other end of the phone. She was reported missing on June 8, 2010, after she failed to check in on her 3-year-old daughter, whom she had left with family. That's how they knew something was wrong. Megan always called to check on Liliana. Liliana Waterman was at the courthouse. She told reporters she is very, very thankful for the guilty plea. Liliana was 3 years old when her mother left that motel room and never came back. She is a young adult now. She has lived her entire conscious life without her mother, and she stood outside a courthouse and said she was thankful. That is what this case costs, not an abstraction. A little girl who grew up asking where her mom went. Amber Lynn Costello was 27 years old. Amber struggled with a heroin addiction. She worked as an escort to help support her habit, according to Suffolk County Police. That sentence, in a police report, in a court document, is the kind of sentence that gets used to quietly explain why a woman's disappearance doesn't make the front page. She had an addiction. She made choices that put her in danger. What the sentence leaves out is this: Amber Lynn Costello was a daughter. She was a sister. She was 27 years old. She was struggling with something that millions of Americans are struggling with today as you watch this. And she deserved help. And she deserved to be found. She was last seen leaving her home in West Babylon on September 2nd, 2010, to meet a client. A friend later told police the man drove a Chevrolet Avalanche. That detail, the green truck, would eventually end this monster, but not before it was too late for Amber. These are the 8 women this animal killed. Not 8 cases, not 8 Jane Does, not 8 entries in a database, 8 lives, 8 families, 8 sets of people who have spent years, some of them decades, sitting with an unbearable silence where a person used to be. Melissa Kahn, Maureen's sister, had one final thing to say, speaking directly to any family anywhere who is still waiting for answers about a loved one. She said, "Keep going. Your loved ones matter. They are not forgotten. And one day, answers can come." Say their names: Sandra, Karen, Valerie, Jessica, Maureen, Melissa, Megan, Amber. He thought that by erasing them, he could erase the evidence of who he really was. Instead, their names will outlast him. By 2016, Mari Gilbert had become one of the most recognizable faces in the fight for justice at Gilgo Beach. After Shannan disappeared in May of 2010, Mari refused to let her daughter's name be forgotten. She appeared on television. She confronted the police. She demanded answers when many felt the investigation had stalled. For 6 years, she carried the weight of uncertainty. She believed Shannan's death was a homicide, Authorities disagreed. The battle continued. But then another tragedy struck the Gilbert family. On July 23, 2016, Mari received a call from her daughter, Sarah Gilbert, who was struggling with severe mental illness. According to family members and attorneys, Sarah had been experiencing hallucinations and hearing voices. Mari went to help her daughter, just as she had done many times before. What happened next would devastate the family. Police say Mari was attacked inside an apartment building in Ellenville, New York. Officers responding to the scene found Mari dead from multiple stab wounds. Sarah was found at the location and was later charged with murder. A knife was recovered by investigators. The woman who had spent years searching for answers about her missing daughter was gone. She was 52 years old. In 2017, Sarah Gilbert was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Court proceedings focused heavily on her long history of severe mental illness, including schizophrenia. For many people following the Gilgo Beach case, Mari Gilbert became more than Shannan's mother. She became a symbol of persistence, a mother who refused to stop asking questions, a mother who refused to let her daughter be forgotten. And although Mari never lived to see Rex Heuermann's arrest in 2023, many believe her relentless pressure kept the case in the public eye during the years when it might otherwise have faded from public view. This is where we'll leave the story for now. Part 2 ends here. The final part of this case will be the day of the sentencing on June 17th, 2026. I will make a last video with the sentence and the victim's impact statements. Stay tuned for that one. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Stay safe, stay alert, and always pay attention to what's happening around you. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next case when it's released. Until next time, take care.